Hello, welcome back to What's Happening in John's Shed. This is my video on the twin SU carburetors that I intend fitting to my Mini Cooper. I've still not made my mind up definitely I'm going to fit them. I have a HIF 44 on it at the moment and on the engine, and I might stick with that for now. These are very nice, they look nice, they're very period. I'll see how I go. I've got all the stuff to put them on, but I want to get the engine running and set up first. So yeah, these come to bits quite easy, don't they? Look. So we'll just take them off this manifold. Says John. Oh, that's the secret. Look, you have to take all the nuts off. That's one, and that's the other. These linkages are very simple and they work very well. Just slot into there, look, and operate. The pinch bolt here, so that you can synchronise the carburetors. Same on the choke. You can synchronise that as well by undoing these pinch bolts. A lot of people don't realise this, and you can screw the tick over screw right out on one carburetor and it won't slow down anymore, and that's because the other carburetor is setting it on there, and what you have to do is under that pinch and make sure they're all seated the same before you even start trying to set anything up, otherwise you're going to very easily run out of adjustment. So we'll take those two linkages out there, right, and that's the manifold with the heat shield, and the return springs for the throttles hook into these two little holes here, or three holes even, so you've got a choice. Yeah, so they're there. That originally would have mounted a little damper on the vacuum system, I believe, from memory. And we'll just put this over here. Which one shall we do first? Well, I'll just do one. So that's the right hand one, that's the left hand one. I'm left-handed, so I'm biased. Let's go left. That's obviously the fuel supply pipe. Probably ready for renewing that. And these are simple to look at. What you've got to remember is these are a very accurate metering device, and they've got to operate in extremely poor conditions, and that's why I'm quite impressed with them. You know, they're a very old design. They go way back to the 30s if you look at the original designs of them, and the principles stayed much the same. So there we have the butterfly, which controls the airflow in, and this is the piston, which slides up and down in this chamber, and that in the bottom, we'll see in a minute, that there has got a tapered needle that runs into a jet here, and when the engine when the throttle is opened, when that opens, the engine obviously draws a depression, a vacuum if you like, and that vacuum acts in this chamber through porting, and that lifts this piston. So obviously the more you open the butterfly, the more negative depression is on that side, and that will lift it this further, which is quite clever. So it's very what's the word, linear. So the more you open it, the more vacuum, the more vacuum, more vacuum, until it reaches the top. The needle is tapered in such a way that when they're set up correctly, which is another science in its own, the further up that goes, the more fuel it gets, because the engine's getting more air, so it demands more fuel. So that taper can determine the mixture through the rev range, so you can get a flat spot on a carburetor, say, depending on cams and all, infinite different things, even the weather and the temperature. But for a general usage, so you can end up with a flat spot where it's perhaps running weak at, say, 3,000 revs with your setup. So you can adjust the needle with a lot of knowledge. You can alter the taper on the needle to give a little bit more fuel at various rev ranges, but obviously you need the equipment to be able to do that. So for road use, general road use, it's quite difficult to get the perfect setup, especially this day and age with modern fuels. You know, the old lead used to be a great thing to add to petrol, because you could run a lot more advance on the ignition timing, and you could run slightly high compressions without much problem of running on, or pinking as people call it, or pre-ignition, and that can be a problem. And running hot, especially if you start running high compression, which everybody seems to like to go for. You go for high compression and a hot cam, and you can get into all sorts of problems. And it's always a bit of a compromise, like anything for general everyday use. If it was a track car, it's going to be running more either flat out or not. So that can be, oh, that's nice and clean in there, look. That's good. No gasket on it, look. So somebody had some silicone there, I think bathroom sealant. Right, so this is the float assembly. So the petrol comes in through there, or gasoline comes in through this pipe here and into this chamber. And here, some of them have a little aluminium plate that slips over there, hides that hole, but that is the overflow. If this floods, if the float level gets too high of fuel, rather than it all go into the carburetor and flood the engine completely, this is an overflow which goes out of that hole there, look. So that's the overflow pipe. So if you see all this wet through and petrol running down, that's what it is. This float valve here, which isn't usually a problem. If they've been stood a long while, or like this one, look, it's moving now, look. Right. So basically, this is a float. A lot of the brass floats, I've got SUs on my other car, and these are brass, soldered ends, and the modern fuels attacked the solder, and my floats turned into sinks because they both were full of petrol. So when I switched the ignition on, the pumps filled the carbs and it just poured petrol everywhere. Sorry about that little break. I had the district nurse to come and check my new leg, and everything's looking good, which is great, isn't it? So let's get back to this. I'm just getting sat down again. Yeah, so as I say, that's the overflow hole, and that needle valve there can stick in that position. So, and also they can get dirt. It can stick in that position and starve the carburetor of petrol, so the float drops but no petrol can get out. And the other way, the soundtrack's from a crazy dog. The other way is that they can get dirt under this seat where that sits. Let's see if I can get that pin out. I've never tried this on this one, so it may not want to come out. The dirt sits under that little valve seat, and the valve can't close. I'll not mess about too much. Yeah, that valve can't close, so the petrol just keeps pouring in, even though the float might be up there. Now, the good thing about these, and it's not on all, this arm is metal, as you can see, steel riveted to that. Plastic ones aren't, obviously. But what you can do, and it is something I have found over the years, the float height, it makes a difference to how rich the mixture runs when the engine's obviously drawing a lot of fuel. So if you're getting near flat out, or you're using a lot of load, if the float is too low, it can make them run weak at top end. Not always, it's not as I say, there's so many variables, but it can. So I've always set these up by, if you look at this face, if you set this face parallel with this face, that gives you the optimum float height. If it's low, like that, the level in the float chamber will drop. If it's high, it'll be right up here, which can make it run rich. So it can make a difference. It certainly does on motorbikes, especially small capacity ones. Anyway, that's just another tip that I've got. And you can, if you're very careful, you can alter that with a pair of long nose pliers, or 2 pairs of long nose pliers. Take it off and just deflect that slightly to alter that position in relation to that valve. People might be all say no, no, no. The other way you can do it is, I've found, is if you get a piece of pipe on there and into your mouth and blow, and you can shut that slowly, and as soon as it stops you blowing, you can check that. When it gets to that point there, I would say personally that's about right. It's just, if you're looking at there, there's a little tiny spring-loaded pin, like a damper. So when you get to that point, if you just put a little tiny bit of pressure on that, that will stop you being able to blow in there, which is similar to when the fuel flows in. So that will give you that, which that looks spot on to me. I'll be quite happy with that. Obviously I haven't blown on that, but there's another little top tip. Hope you can see all that. Everyone's had a shot with it. And there's the float chamber. And that's another thing you've got to watch on using this gasket cement. This residual, that's a perfect little piece of that, would be perfect to get under that seat that I was telling you about. That's the sort of thing. It doesn't look anything, but it can cause so much heartbreak. And it's same in engines. I've seen engines I've stripped down where people have used far too much. Even the really good quality gasket cement, all this that's squeezed out, it's got to go somewhere. And if it goes into your engine, I've seen it block oil ways, oil filters, all sorts of things. And I don't like it particularly. I'm not saying it's anything wrong with it, but it's all right in its place. But, these gaskets are quite important as well. So you get a new one with a service kit. So this here is rubber mounted, supposedly, even though it's got a bolt, just a bolt through it. That one's okay. I think the other one's a bit loose. Yeah, let me show you that one. Look. That one's a bit loose. It won't leak fuel, but the rubber mounting is just to counteract vibration. Because as I say, this is a very accurate metering device, and people forget that, and it's put in a very, very unpleasant environment to operate, really. So they do very well, I think. See, it's all coming to bits quite well. I did, to be honest, I did just crack these screws before I started, just to make sure I wasn't struggling with one that was seized up. And yeah, this damper is very tight. Careful, these rip very easily, this plastic. Let's just crack it here. Oh, there's still a bit of oil in there. That's the damper, and that floats on there, the little circlip, look, and there's a clearance around that and there. And as that, and I'll show you, when it slides up and down that tube inside, the oil that's in there has to pass down the outside and through the inside there. And you can get different ones of these to do a different damping, amount of damping. The other thing you can do is change the viscosity or the weight of the oil in this damper, which I'll show you in a moment. So carefully lift this off. Now this is, as I say, this is a, there we go. This is a precision metering device. So there's the chamber that slips over, and this is the return spring. Again, you can get different strength return springs for obvious reasons. Obviously, the heavier the spring, the more resistance there is for it opening. If you didn't have this and you didn't have the damper, when you open that, this would just go whack to the top, which you don't want. You want a nice controlled flow. So the balance between the damper and the spring loading is quite critical. And that's the difference between, I mean, we've all been in somebody's car, you thought, blimey, this goes well. And when we've all been in a car where you think, well, this is a bit gutless. And that can be something as simple as that balance, or the wrong oil. You know, I've had them where you can't even push the damper in through the oil because of the resistance, because it's that heavy, that thick. See, that's just, yeah, that's quite a light oil, I would say. That's sort of a 30 weight, I would think. 2050 is okay, but as I say, it varies an awful lot. AC Dodd does a really, really good course of lessons on these. He knows infinitely more than I do, but I'm just running you through this. And that's the piston that slides up and down inside this chamber. You very often find if they've been standing a long while, this gets corroded or just gets a little bit of grit in it. They can be sticky, and if they stick up, your engine just bogs down all the time. That one, you know, considering this has been in a shed for 30 years, it's unbelievable, really. So that's that, and that's the piston. Now that piston carries this needle, which wasn't fastened in. Carries this needle. That would have been handy, wouldn't it? That that's loose, look. Anyway, that's the needle, and on the needle here, there's there's a code number, and there's many different ones of these. And there's the taper you can see. So obviously when that's down at the bottom, the jet that it runs in, the clearance around that taper and the diameter of the jet is smaller. So as you open the throttle and this slides up, this taper moves through that same diameter hole. So by the time it gets to the top there, the clearance is a lot bigger than there. So that would be flat out there, and that amount of clearance would be there to allow that amount of fuel. If it's there, obviously the taper's getting bigger, so the clearance is smaller until it gets to there where it's its smallest. Obviously you don't want it to shut off, that's the engine would stop. So that, and these do get bent sometimes. People are a bit heavy-handed and they can get bent, so it's always worth checking that they're not bent, and you can usually see if they're worn as well. But I think for the cost of them, it's perhaps possibly, if you're going to rebuild, get a new one. And so that's that. And that sits and moves through that jet down that's the smaller piece in the middle, through the jet holder, which is, you've obviously got your casing, then you've got the jet holder, and then in the middle you've got the jet. And that is fixed to a degree, but I'll go into that. So that needle slides up and down through there. As I say, you can look at those to see if they're ovaled. They do, because obviously there's a flow of air through here, which is going to act to one side of the needle, which will push it across a little. And they can wear the needle and they can wear the jet oval and a sort of a rub flat on the needle. So that's another thing. So there's the adjustments on your throttle and choke. So if you look at that'll be in the closed position. So this one is your tick over screw. So as you screw that in, that will push that around there, which opens that. So this is what I was saying. If your engine's ticking over too fast and you back this off and it has no effect, there's a good chance it'll be the other carb that's making that stay off its. And usually if you push that, it'll make a difference, but it'll spring back. What it needs doing then is that adjustment on that link bar, as I say, undo that, so you can seat them both and then nip it up again, and then you start so they're both closed at the same time. So that will be in that position. Your spring would hold that in that position the spring would hold that shut. So that's your tick over screw. Now on here, when you pull the choke, what the choke actually does is that jet that I've just told you about in there is connected through this linkage to here. So when you pull the choke, what it does, I hope you can see all this. When you pull that, it pushes the jet down. You see that there? That pushes the jet down. And at the same time, you look here, as it pushes the jet down, it also turns this. So it gives it more fuel and a little tiny bit more air on that butterfly. Look, as I push it, that opens slightly more. So that, pushing that down, pulls that down, which pulls that out of that seat more. So it's over fueling, so you get more fuel. So a choke it chokes the air and gives it more fuel, makes it rich for cold starting. So that's another adjustment people don't realise. And it's on that little cam look. As you do that, you can adjust that out, so that affects that more or less. So that sliding jet there. Look how free that is, it's unbelievable. And that flexible pipe there is obviously because that's fixed and that moves up and down. So you've got to have a flexible thing. I've never had much trouble with these. These, if your top engine steady used to break, if you're or be very worn, these could actually clatter the bulkhead because the engine would, with the torque reaction through the wheels, the engine would rock back. And these, I've known these, and if you look how far away it is, it's an amazing amount. These smack the bulkhead and they can be bent, and then of course you're in all sorts of trouble. Anyway, that's from experience. Not that I would ever do any hard starts like that in a Mini. But yeah, so that's that jet holder. I'm not going to take this out because I'm just getting a pile of bits here now. But that all that does is undo from there. There's a little gland in there which can be a little pain in the neck. It's only like a little rubber O-ring. You pull that out, undo this little screw, and that pulls out of there. So you can buy new ones of these, and these are all coded as well. There's lots of different specs of these. Now, a misconception with these is if the engine is running rich, and this people get a bit confused about this. If the engine's running rich, people used to say, oh, I just turn the jet nut and weaken it off. And what that does, it lets this jet go further in or pushes it further out, depending on which way. There's a spring behind it to keep it in position. So if you screw it out, it pushes this down, which makes that richer. And if you screw that in, it makes it leaner. But it only does it at low revs because obviously the needle pulls out of the jet at the top end, so there's only a small amount of adjustment on this. So it only really adjusts your mixture at low revs. So people you say, oh yeah, if it's running rich, if your plugs are all sooty, tweak that. Well, it may be if you've been running slowly and not using a lot of revs. But if you rev the engine and make it labour, it's your jet sizes and your needle size positions and all these dampers I've been telling you about that determines the mixture. This is rule of thumb. People are going to correct me, but as a rule of thumb, that is the fact. You've probably seen, if you've watched any or read any information about setting these up, there's a thing you do when this is all in here and all built up, and there's a notch here, look, to position that so you get it in the right place. So when that's in there, when it's all built up and the engine's ticking over, just here underneath there's a little pin with a spring under it. If you push that, it pushes this up, look. And what that does, obviously, is let more air in. Now, they say, as a rule of thumb, if the engine's ticking over, you've got your tick over right. To check that the mixture's right at the low end, at bottom end, if you do that, push it up and hold it for 5 seconds. If the engine stalls, if it starts to stutter to stall, it's running a little weak because you're adding more air, but you're adding more fuel, but not air. On the other hand, if it's running rich and you do that, the engine revs will pick up momentarily, and then it will pick up. If it's right, if the mixture's right and you do that, the revs will pick up very slightly and then settle down again. This is all rule of thumb because it all does vary quite a lot. So that's so you can see where that is and explain it. I mean, if you want to go into greater detail, there's a lot better and more knowledgeable people than I. I'm just giving you the knowledge I've picked up over the years messing about with these things. So that's it really. This being loose isn't really a problem. It's not ideal. That's not bad actually, that's okay. The other one's a bit wobbly. You can perhaps nip it up a little bit if you're looking for a washer on it and tighten it up, but you don't want it flapping about. I've seen them where they're pretty loose. So that's really an SU carburetor. On the manifold as well, I forgot to say, this port here, or this port, can be the vacuum tapping for a brake servo, or a vacuum if you've got a vacuum gauge or the such like. I don't know, what is this, a proper Mohawk? Yeah, that's a Mohawk. That is a British Leyland or Austin Morris Motors part. They're quite good actually, and they're nicely made, and they've got they've not got any terrible castings or anything. They're not the most efficient, but general purpose are pretty good. You can get better ones, but I'm one for only spending money if you really need to. I've modified loads of stuff and got really, really good results. Everybody said when we built a 1380 engine years ago, my brother and I, and people said, oh, you'll not get the maximum out of it with a single carb. We had an HIF 44 jetted up, and everybody said that's not enough. You want a twin choke Weber. Well, we hadn't got the money for a twin choke Weber, and we thought it was a little more complication. We took it to the rolling road, and it was making 105 brake horsepower when we got there. And the guy said, to be honest, twin choke Weber should perhaps go another 3 or 4 brake horsepower in this spec of engine. So we were quite happy, and the good carbs. As long as the balance synchronised, which can be a bit of a pain in the neck. If you synchronise them, they're pretty good and reliable. And you can get good service kits now. They're available everywhere. But anyway, I hope that's been helpful. And I'm not rabbited on too much. They all do clean up very well. I've got another pair of these. I think they're called HS4s. These are HS2s. I think the HS4s are the 1.5 ones. These are 1.25 bore. I've got 1.5 ones. I think they were off a Triumph Spitfire 1500. They'd be quite good on a Mini, especially if you've done a bit of work. Like mine's got Metro turbo cam in it, and roller rockers and various things. Had 940 head ported and various things. It's perhaps the 1.5 would perhaps be better on that if I was using twin carbs, but I've got the HIF 44, which from experience I've found quite successful. Yeah, that's just a little bit wobbly, but it's not bad. I'm not going to strip that one down until I've got this all packed away. There you are, that's it. Well, I hope you like that, and please like and subscribe, and make any comments you wish. Positive ones are always better. And please like and subscribe. Again, I'll say it again, but it does make a lot of difference to the little channel I've got here. I don't make any money from this. I purely do it simply for my own pleasure and to help anybody else I can. Because I've struggled. I was lucky that I had a big brother who was the fountain of all knowledge. Sadly, no longer with us, but yeah, there you are. So I'll see you again soon, and please like and subscribe. Cheers.